I've been in the WebRTC to about 3 or 4 years now. I'm a blogger and consultant. You can check out my blog at webrtcHacks. It's a blog for WebRTC developers focused on technical content. And today I'd just like to briefly, I guess before we start out, maybe get a sense of how many of you are actually pretty familiar with WebRTC already? All right, so about half. So I'll spend a couple minutes just talking about what WebRTC is, just for some background, and then we'll dive into what's new and just spend a couple minutes there before we get into the real meat. All right, so first, what is WebRTC? It's a state-of-the-art technology. It really does include a lot of best-of-breed technologies around video engines, voice engines, firewall, NAT traversal, and all this technology came from multi-million, really close to $90 million of acquisitions that Google made and turned around and open sourced and made available as part of this WebRTC project. All right. WebRTC is also 3 APIs. We'll talk about all of these today a little bit, but there's a get user media to basically grab a microphone, camera. There's a peer connection to allow you to do a peer-to-peer connection to another party. And then there's a data channel API that allows you to send arbitrary data in real time between 2 parties. WebRTC is also a web and internet draft by the W3C, Worldwide Web Consortium, and the IETF. Drafts take a long time to turn into standards. WebRTC, particularly the get user media part, is actually very close. Probably the peer connection aspects are 6 to 12 months behind that, but is actually making very steady progress, and as I'll show in a minute, it's not really slowing anyone down. In fact, here, it's inevitably going to become a standard. It's really getting to a point where it's mature enough to be formally standardized and come out of the draft mode. WebRTC is also a huge open source community, which was started by Google under webrtc.org, making all that code open source. But actually, there's been other implementations of WebRTC outside of Google, which is a great sign showing that WebRTC is reaching maturity. One, Open WebRTC, is done by Ericsson Labs. And beyond that, for everyone out there, their developers, it's very, very easy to get started, and there's a large number of frameworks to work with WebRTC. So I just listed a few of them out there. But there's a huge number of WebRTC projects, open source ones that you can use and leverage to get started with. And you'll see some of that when our speakers talk tonight too. Right, and here's just some stats. This is just from GitHub here, and this is actually just showing active users with WebRTCs, active repos and active contributors pushing code, and you see it's up and to the right. I did also compare this against WebGL, and it actually compares very well the growth rate and trajectory. It's not quite where WebGL was, or WebGL as just one technology for comparison, started several years earlier. But WebRTC, as you can see, is doing extremely well with the development community. And there's a lot of people using WebRTC. So Google is one obvious user for Hangouts, for Chromecast, for remote desktop, for Google Play. Amazon, with their Mayday service, is all powered based on WebRTC. They were one of the first adopters. Snapchat, if you do the push-to-video capability with Snapchat, that's all based on WebRTC via an acquisition of a WebRTC startup that they had done. Mozilla with Firefox actually has several different WebRTC projects. So if you use the Firefox browser, you might notice the Hello button, which allows you to do peer-to-peer calls with WebRTC. They also have another project called Together.js, which allows other developers to take and implement very simple collaboration tools that are based on WebRTC into any website. All right. Facebook Messenger uses WebRTC, and they've done a lot of expansion recently and added video capabilities to this. But Facebook has, they just reported in March over 600 million monthly active users. So it makes them the number 2 carrier in the world. I mean, number 1 is China Mobile with 800. But this is given that Facebook Messenger has added 100 million users in 4 months, this probably won't be long before Facebook Messenger is the number 1 telecom service provider in the world, if you look at it from that perspective. All right, a few others. Some of you might use some Atlassian tools or HipChat. HipChat's powered based on WebRTC if you use the video capability. One of the former founders of Skype just launched a startup a little bit over a year ago called Wire. This is all based on WebRTC. For enterprise users out there, Cisco has an enterprise messenger collaboration tool they call Cisco Spark, all based on WebRTC. And another famous company that you might have heard of, Pied Piper, uses WebRTC.
VP9 AVR to reduce bits and using WebRTC to carry the bulk of the load via P2P. So basically, I pay for one tiny ass outgoing stream, and the user's ISP picks up the whole tab.
Right? So WebRTC is pretty big, right? So what's next for WebRTC? And one of the biggest drawbacks for a lot of users or a lot of developers to start using WebRTC is, what about Microsoft Internet Explorer supporting it? And Microsoft finally came around to announcing their support in their new Microsoft Edge browser, which will be available in Windows 10. So while not ideal because it doesn't cover the existing Microsoft Internet Explorer install base, Microsoft is making pretty big investments and has been very active in the WebRTC development community, and will have coverage as part of Microsoft Edge. There's a lot of other options and things you can do for them, some that we'll talk about tonight if you do need to support that existing install base, but there's no doubt that really the only other major browser vendor who's been silent on what they're going to do with WebRTC is Apple with Safari. But given that they're silent with everything that they're going to do before they announce it, who knows what's going to happen. So another big change in WebRTC is a much stronger emphasis on mobile. And this is actually a slide right from Google at another meetup. They've shown this a few times, where they're really emphasizing mobile optimizations, mobile performance, improvements in battery life, faster connectivity, and better handling of varying network conditions. Another major change is the APIs are evolving to become much more granular and a lot simpler. So today, the WebRTC API, if you want to do finer grained or more precise media control, you have to use a complex mechanism known as session description protocol. This is changing and evolving to be more accessible via a normal JavaScript type API, right? And this is a pretty exciting development that's really just starting now that WebRTC 1.0 or 1.1 is getting a really mature stage. They're thinking about a lot of this for WebRTC 2.0 and actually actively in discussions and planning for that right now. Another big change is some shifts in mindset around peer-to-peer. And WebRTC is great because it allows peer-to-peer communication. But as a lot of larger deployments are finding, particularly on mobile environments, peer-to-peer doesn't always work best, or it's not always optimal for a lot of situations. So we do see a lot more scenarios where maybe people are starting by terminating media in the network and then falling back to a peer-to-peer scenario, or leveraging different types of, this is called the turn server. It's a media relay element out there when those things don't work. And we'll touch on a little bit during the talks today. And there's also a slow evolution to making WebRTC look a lot more like the existing web environment for enterprises. So it's not uncommon for especially large enterprises to have a web proxy. There really wasn't anything comparable like that for WebRTC. But again, these are still relatively early stages for some of this, but there are efforts to basically make a local enterprise WebRTC proxy, which would work in conjunction with an application level type proxy, a turn server it's called here. So I'll probably be running around a lot. I hope I get to talk to a lot of you, but if not, feel free to reach out.